I'm really excited to be here, and I hope to inform you a little bit about open source. Some of these topics and some of the names have been covered, so hopefully it won't be mumbo jumbo or not understandable. As developers, sometimes we have a habit of making things less understandable than they need to be. So this was supposed to be the big surprise. There's Boundless. That's okay. We can move forward with that. Apologize. No, still giving me some trouble. So yes, this is official as of today. Here's our fancy new brand. I'm having trouble syncing my notes with the slides, so give me a second here. I'll skip that. And if you haven't already, you can update your bookmarks. There's a real quick pattern to remember. We're referring to ourselves as Boundless, but you will find us at Boundless GeCo, so it's kind of a find and replace, or of course a quick Google. And some of my thunder has also been stolen. You're probably familiar with this man from Michael's presentation. If you didn't recognize him close enough, his name is Paul Ramsey. He's a great open source thinker and speaker, and I'm proud to say also a coworker. Unfortunately for you, Paul is not able to be here today, and you have me. He was kind enough to loan me a rather large pair of shoes that I'm hopefully going to be able to fill for you. Once I coordinate button pressing here. Paul played a large role in the development of open source GIS. He was responsible for the PostGIS database, and among many others, these are the building blocks for what is now modern open source GIS. So I want to go through a quick overview of some other projects that have contributed to it. In the beginning, there was the shapefile. So everyone's asleep now, because that's supposed to be a joke. This was a misstep in the right direction, though, because what it allowed was interchange of spatial data. The real right direction occurred when the specification was opened in about 1997. I was one of the implementers for the GeoTools project of the second generation shapefile reader, and believe me, reading that specification and dealing with the shapefile, it was not intended to be open. It was opened more as a courtesy for interoperability. The last computer I bought that shipped with such a hard drive that could take, or a drive that could take such a disk was about 10 years ago. So consider that, please, when you email someone a shapefile. Just think about the legacy of technology that you've left behind in other places. Actually, the foundations go back a ways before that. I won't read all these off, but besides Moss, these are all, that I know of, these are all still alive and in wide use today. Indeed, GeCo shipped with ArcGIS 9.2 to leverage its support for handling a wide variety of raster formats. Interestingly, I just saw this recently, in the tour of what's new in ArcGIS 10, there are notes that say all raster formats at 10 use the GeCo library. So technically, I don't know if that means they gave up their internal libraries and just used GeCo, but I thought it was an interesting point. There are also different ways to pronounce it. I use GeCo, as noted, and OGR for whatever reason. Other people call it Goodle or Ogre. So if the way I said it didn't make sense or the way it was spelled, and you've heard different words elsewhere, that is why. The next decade brought the beginnings of development of a number of components that make up our OpenGeo suite. Paul's contribution, as noted, PostGIS is a fundamental building block for the OpenGeo spatial software stack because it adds open source implementation of spatial predicates, indexes, and other functions to the database. As I noted, I started with GeoTools and GeoServer back around 2002 while working at the Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service unit in Fort Collins. I was kind of on a researchy project, and we had historically, I guess before I'd gotten there, had some problems using ARC objects. The ARS's mission was to come up with models and applications which would then be deployed to the NRCS field offices. And they'd had a lot of problems. They had thousands of field offices getting software updates, having incompatibilities, et cetera. What we needed for these hydrologic models was really a simple map display. It was what were the basins we were interested in, some additional hydrological model output, parameters, and we needed it over time, and we needed it color-coded. We needed to scrub back and forth and see how things were working. This wasn't for public consumption. It was more for model implementers, parameter tweakers, and I guess whoever the end users were going to be. So I got into GeoTools. I found that. Previously, we'd been using a homegrown package developed by my colleagues, my other colleagues, former colleagues in Germany. But GeoTools was a great opportunity because there were all these other people involved building. I contributed the shapefile. They were building rendering. It was also a really great way to be introduced into software development, as I was pretty much working by myself at that point. So I don't want to bore you too much history, especially mine, but I want to share a few quotes that hopefully illustrate how ideas and messages around open source software have changed over time. And hopefully you'll laugh again, but maybe it's too late in the afternoon for that. So this was around 2001 from Steve Ballmer. It's kind of a famous quote. Linux is a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything it touches. He did not mean to imply that Linux was so advanced that it could self-replicate out of control, like cancer, and destroy their vital organs. Move forward a few years, maybe we reconsidered my last thought. From 2013, Corporate Vice President of Program Management in Microsoft Windows Server and System Center Group. Their titles are as verbose as their products. We knew that we needed to ensure that Windows is the best platform to run Linux workloads, as well as open source components. So they're hosting the cancer now. I found this quote on Esri's not-for-profit site, conservationgis.org. Can everyone read this, or shall I keep reading? I found it humorous for two reasons. It implies free open source software is not professional. I guess that's why Microsoft wants you to virtualize it. This also implies it's not supported. I mean, who would support unprofessional software? Skip forward to what appears to have been 2012 from what I could find on the website. Esri is committed to supporting the best open source software technology within our products. Yada, 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 a bunch of products listing. So things change. People make practical choices that fit. Oh, I'm sorry. Skipped ahead a little bit. This is perhaps why people make these practical choices. There's no such thing as cheap or expensive in business. There's only worth the money or not. I found this great quote on this blog reading about something completely different, but I thought it was very useful for today. Mathematically speaking, though, if it costs nothing and it has any value, the worth is infinite or incalculable. Of course, everything has a cost. So the take-home is that if it costs an order of magnitude less, but provides the same value, then the worth is an order of magnitude more. So all kidding aside, two quick practical examples of why companies use open source geospatial software, or open source in their geospatial software. I already noted that ArcGIS uses the GeCo library for its great supported raster file formats, but why would they use Python as their scripting language? It's a stable, productive language, a wide community of users, which means it's supported without really having to provide support. There's a rich ecosystem of libraries, including pre-existing GIS libraries, including wrappers around Google and Ogre, a ton of plotting libraries, math libraries, statistics. It's a very great ecosystem to buy into and interoperate with. It's free, and it's already supported technically by others. So if you're going to replace an existing scripting language like AML or Avenue, I actually know people who are still running a lot of AML. You might as well use a quality scripting language, and one that is open and will presumably not disappear in the future. So a follow-up case study. Who's familiar with the SpatialLite or SQLite database? A few people. If you didn't know about it, It's the most widely used database in the world. It's probably in your pocket, in your phone. It's in your Adobe Reader. It's in just about everything. So technically supported. It's OGC compliant. This is the spatial light. This is like the equivalent of PostGIS extensions to PostgreSQL. Spatial light adds extensions to SQLite. It's OGC compliant, so that means it has the simple features for SQL. ArcGIS 10.2 and QGIS 1.9 compatibility. This means that you can save spatial data in ArcGIS 10.2 and then open it in the QGIS desktop product QGIS 1.9. Could this spell the end of the shapefile finally, or the personal geodatabase? And finally, it is supported really widely by Oracle, Mozilla, Nokia, Adobe, and others. So it's not going away anytime soon. It's a format that will stay. So Esri decided to leverage open source because it was a good fit with their business models and in wide use. It was a practical choice. So did these federal and local agencies who use some of our clients. A shout out to Howard County, Maryland in the lower right, where I was born and raised. They still have the heat and humidity, but they made the right choice on software. They also joined these commercial and international organizations as users of open source geospatial products supported by Boundless. So how about for you? What's it worth to implement open source software in your organization? What might you gain? What are some of the risks? Michael helped me out in a lot of ways here, discussing some of the approaches which you might take. But there are soft people skills and considerations as well. So I want to go over kind of a number of different pros and cons and that you've probably heard brought up before. Oh, wait a second. There we go. Oh, I lost my slide, sorry. You can see I don't do too many PowerPoints, which I'm actually happy about. So running is to proprietary software as biking is to open source. A lot of good analogies in previous presentations. I want to make this one stick, but it's going to take a little bit. I was trying to think of a good analogy. I was oxygen deprived and mountain biking in the foothills, probably dehydrated, and I was struggling. I realized that the reason why I don't like running is I stopped pretty much as soon as I started. It seemed to involve too much friction. My knees and shins couldn't take the repeated pounding. And I thought about this. I struggled up the hill, breathing super hard, and I rolled down the other side. This might work. So similarly, I started using Linux when I was doing my second bachelor's in computer science. This was back around 2000. And the professors talked about a C compiler. So I had Windows 95, and I looked for a C compiler. It appeared I had to buy one. But it wasn't a C compiler that we used in the computer labs, it was Visual C. And I had no idea where to start. I just wanted to type in CC, my program, and have it work to get my homework done, so I didn't have to go to the lab. So people had mentioned Linux. So I installed it and was immediately hooked. No more mysterious Windows 95, blue screen of death. Granted, all that stuff's gone away, but I have been unable to go back. So I choose biking, and proprietary software gets running. So how is it similar? It's what you already know how to do. It's what you've been doing. You've got the equipment, you're trained. You can go a long way. You can run a marathon running. It's not a problem. It's instinctive, and add some water and persistence, you can do 25 miles. How about biking? Wheels conserve your momentum. That's, once you've got up to speed, you can just keep rolling. You don't have that constant pounding friction. Unlike my hobbit-shaped feet, bad knees, and shin splints, myself, or other many non-surgeons, can actually work on and fix my bike. I would never ever attempt to pull open my knee and twiddle around in there, but I can do that with my bike. I can find people to do it for me if I don't know how to. You can even build your own bike as these ladies have. I don't know if I would call that a bike, but it's certainly composed of bike parts, something far more advanced. And finally, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. You can build on what others have done and tweet about it while you're standing there. So, back to the original scheduled program where I missed my slide. I want to go over a few of the more soft type of issues that you might hear about or even run up against in your own organization. So this is a common phrase, free as in beer. Advocates will point to the lack of cost when using open software. Now, this assumes the knowledge of how to use a given product is free, but that's not true. While there are often adequate, freely available resources for use in training, the time required must also be considered. So, retraining costs oftentimes don't involve going to expensive course. They can be self-paced work. Once you start to learn how to learn, then that cost continues to go down. At least that's what I've found in my career. Free as in speech versus the cost of understanding your licensing, the open source licensing. Free as in speech is often used to describe the difference between free and freedom. It's also the difference between freeware and open source software. The freedom implied is that you can use and modify the software and nobody can take that away. Versus something that's freeware, they could give it out for a while, but once they find out that there's lots of people using it, they can start charging. And it's probably not free to extend or use in any other way. So that's for open source licenses. This is a big one because this is brought up many times as a barrier to adoption. There's too many, they're too complicated, they're viral, they cause cancer. Most of the time, just using open source software has absolutely no legal implications. You can download an open source project, do some stuff with it, whether it's in your personal life. I actually know a drywaller and an electrician who run all their books on Linux-based software. And likewise, if you are a business, you can download it like those guys. But let's say it's part of your process, part of your output. You can produce outputs using open source and then distribute them, and there's no licensing issues. The difference is if you take that open source software and put it into your product and then redistribute that. That's when you need to call the lawyers. So, active constructive communities versus dead or dying difficulty communities. You often see this as one of the warnings about using open source software. It doesn't matter if it's open source or a proprietary community. It could be dead or dying. It can offer a lot of value, or it can be a black hole. Evaluate these ahead of time. It would offer significantly less value. Michael touched on this a bit before. Competitive diverse selection versus overwhelming choices. Many of you probably know that diversity is a valuable asset in healthy natural ecosystems. And it is in the software world too. Cataloging diversity takes time and resources. Picking your favorite cat picture or liking Facebook posts does, but you do it too. Inclusive and transparent development versus overhead of involvement. The inclusive nature and transparency of open source is often cited as a big benefit. These benefits come with a cost too, potential involvement in that community. But if you're integrating software at a low level or providing bug fixes, this overhead will be minimal compared to the gains, especially when you compare it against doing the same thing with proprietary software. Consider too that as a user of open source software, you actually might not even need to get involved in the community. Building developer skills and reputation versus becoming distracted. The barrier to self-paced, exploratory training and development in open source is not monetary, it's time. As a developer's resume starts to become public and evident, posted in the projects they contribute, they may feel motivated and actually become more satisfied. At the same time, it's quite possible that they become distracted with this kind of, resume building, ego boosting. And the fulfillment in learning and contributing to these projects might be seductive. But so is Solitaire, Minesweeper, or something called Candy Crush, which I'm not familiar with. So more eyes, fewer bugs. This is often quoted as an advantage. And it's true. In active, healthy, open source communities, developers review and test each other's code, leading to a better product in the end. Sometimes they get too busy doing this to actually write coherent, non-technical documentation. Non-developers can contribute to fill this gap. Boundless has done this. We've contracted with technical writers to help fill that gap. While our developers are busy implementing the products, we have other folks write the documentation. So open source is not a product, it's a process. Some products are produced using open source processes. So it's not the way you make sausage, it's the way you make the sausage, it's not the actual bratwurst. So due diligence is required before purchasing or integrating, whether it's the actual product or how the processes fit within your organization. One good question to ask is, will this work for us? Not only does it solve our problem, but does it create new ones? Oh, I'm sorry. So be pragmatic. Evaluate the benefits and costs. Select your components, not only based upon whether their function, but are they part of a valuable community that will provide extra benefit. Get to know the community. Ask questions, read the documentation. Get involved or don't. If the product works for you and it seems like it's going to be well supported, SQLite, for example, the community's fine without you. Just use it. Consider development training costs, because that's important. Sometimes you will have employees who don't want to do that because it's something they don't know. Evaluate the availability of support. This is important, and this is where many of the companies that Michael mentioned come into play, Red Hat being the prime example. So as we've seen, open source has gone from being vilified by commercial vendors to warmly embraced. And you can bring it into your organization as well when you consider some of these things. The most important part is component selection. Not only does it do what you want to do, and not only does the community work for you, but can it integrate and interoperate with your software? So to replace a given component with another, that's something that you need to evaluate. In case of a web mapping application stacks, there's 3 tiers of components to consider. The user interface, that's your map or desktop, your map on your web browser or device, your desktop component. Then there's the application server, that's basically ArcGIS server or the analogous GeCo server. There's some other products, Autodesk, Intergraph, Erdos, Apollo. So, and then finally the database. These are all swappable components as long as they speak the same specification, through the same specifications and protocols. So interoperability is provided by standards, de facto or genuine. This implies plug-and-play functionality. Integration is the process of making non-interoperable components work together. Some components might require additional effort. The OpenGeo suite is an example of a bundled stack of components that make up a complete web mapping application framework. The suite can be used as a whole, as in this diagram, or it could, any of those pieces in the other diagram could be replaced and swapped out, assuming interoperability. And we have a number of clients that actually do this for whatever their specific reasons. Open source and geoprocessing. You might not be a user of a web mapping stack. Maybe you're processing huge amounts of data. Maybe you're giving that data to people who are putting it on the web. There's still place for open source software. There's so much of the news is about the web. It's about the interfaces, but this nice illustration here from Esri's ArcGIS 9.3 manual sums up how conceptually simple it could be to replace a given bit of your geoprocessing pipeline with an open source product. So you have that geoprocessing tool there, it takes some input and it spits out some output. So if you find that tool, for whatever reason, it's not fast enough, I like that meme, not reliable enough, or otherwise inadequate, you can just swap it out. Same inputs, same outputs. Now that might take some work, but it's another place where you would find that something like this would work. And I know we started a little bit late, so I didn't keep track of what time that was. Okay. I'll go tell him that. So a quick anecdote. How many people are familiar with Snowdass? Anyone? I see a couple. All right. So Snowdass is a gridded product. There's a bunch of different bands that come out. It's produced by the National Weather Service. I worked on a project which we were using the snow water equivalent, which is essentially, people know what snow water equivalent is? Okay, NRCS, SNOTELS, all this kind of stuff. It's really widely used in hydrological forecasting. So our goal was to produce a process where we could grab the Snowdass grids daily from NOAA, put them onto a server and archive them. Then we could take a given basin of interest, whether it was one of the Weather Service delineated basins or some customer's arbitrary basin, and then we could say, we'll run that through you. And we'll intersect that basin with all the grids, extract the snow water equivalent for the entire basin, and then you can do various statistics and integrate that with your other models. We wanted to compute various statistics, output a grid, put it into a KML, because that was really big at the time, Google Earth, this was a few years ago, and then link it to colored maps with the generated plot overlay. So as you scrubbed through time, you could see your basin snowpack build up, your water graph would go up, and then runoff would come and it would go down. It was pretty cool. We got it together in a few days, along with automated fetching of the data and archiving. I worked together with the GIS technician. He put together a Python model in ArcGIS, and everything was great. Boss, can we get the entire Columbia River Basin for the period of record by tomorrow? I got a conference. Me, no. Why? Well, I don't have an analyst license, and we have 800 days of record, and it takes 4 minutes per day. So let's do a little math. No, you can't have it. Okay, well, this came up over and over again. Boss, I'm going to this conference tomorrow. You think you could run it for the Upper Colorado? No way. So what did we do? We just swapped out the component in the middle that did the intersections. What we were doing was we were pulling binary grids, we were converting them to IMJ files, we were intersecting them with the basins, probably doing some reprojection along the way, waiting 2 to 20 seconds for the license to happen. So there was a lot of overhead there. We did the basin intersect statically up front. I wrote a quick process in Java, and not even using open source, by the way. And we got it down 2 orders of magnitude. So we could run the entire thing in 1/100th of the time. You want that by tomorrow? How about in 5 minutes? It was a pretty nice improvement. I got some kudos, and it was a good example of how you don't have to completely replace something, even as low down and technical as geoprocessing. So I'll skip my other anecdote and jump quickly to online communities. Built around open source or otherwise, these are becoming an invaluable resource for learning. This was a great blog post. It's really hard to see this, and I apologize, but there was a blog post in 2012, and then a follow-up just a few days ago. And how many people are familiar with Stack Exchange? If you're programmers, you probably visited that a few times. Well, there's also the GIS Stack Exchange, and it's a great online place. There's tags, you ask questions, you answer them, you can build reputation, you can vote up questions or shoot them down. The whole thing was designed to make the old very inefficient software forums become easier to use and produce better answers. So the point of this is that a healthy forum that's diverse, again, diverse is good for health, can really promote learning. In the red is general topics, which is a good chunk of it. In the green is open source geospatial tools, and the blue chunk is Esri tools. So you can see over the years, the various slices have remained relatively stable, and this community is thriving. There's thousands of questions. It's a great place to get information. If you haven't been, I encourage it. A lot of talk has been made about the technical or otherwise datum shift in our industry, and for developers, this can be tiring. Sometimes it can be exciting. Around the turn of the century, it was XML. If it wasn't XML, it wasn't getting noticed. Then came a whole bunch of weird things like SOAP, WSDL, UDDI, all built on XML. Beyond Esri SOAP API, if you're even familiar with that, not much of that exists these days in the public, hyperactive world of the next changing technology. But if you're not thinking about virtualization while processing your big data in a NoSQL database, you might feel a little bit boring. Landscapes change rapidly. Michael talked about this in his presentation. 3 years ago at my former employee, we were also discussing whether to choose the Flex API, the Silverlight, or the HTML5. I found these graphs from job trends from Indeed.com. I tried to line them up roughly. The top is HTML5. You can see it was just getting off the ground in January 10. Silverlight in the bottom and Flex in the middle. And Flex had a pretty good chunk of the market there, and Silverlight grew very rapidly at that point. Those two red lines show some interesting inflection points. The left was, quote, and I quote it because it was a blog post or a news article that got a lot of attention. Adobe may have dropped Flash for mobile browsers. Michael pointed this out. This was a ground-shaking point for application development in the client. Your technology just died. And similarly with Microsoft pulls the plug on the Silvernet site. This was kind of a mistake. It was kind of a misunderstanding. But eventually both these statements became true. They were leaks or misunderstandings. And you can see how at those inflection points, the level of growth in job postings kind of just went down and hasn't come up. Of course there's bumps. Of course this is not scientific. But technologies do matter. They change quickly, and you want to invest in the right one. Boundless directions. Not a fan of fashionable phrases, so I'm going to refrain from talking about big data. But I did hear a great piece from Kai Rizdal interviewing Jack Dangerman on marketplace.org the other day. And Kai said to Jack, "So you've been really doing big data for 30 years. And I thought, yeah, we have. I mean, TIFF files are huge. Shape files have millions of points. We've been doing big data for a long time. And I don't want to talk about that anymore because I feel cynical about the use of some of these phrases. So in this rapidly changing landscape, we've talked about mobile. Apparently I forgot that part, but what is Boundless doing? We want to build a development kit. We're not going to build end applications, but we're going to build a development kit that will help you build spatial applications that interoperate with OGC standards. And we also want to focus on web application development in mobile devices. OpenLayers 3 specifically is a reboot of the well-known OpenLayers 2 mapping library. This was funded by Boundless and Camp to Camp. We're going to use modern browser technologies like WebGL and Canvas. It fits together with the mobile strategy for if you don't want to write native applications, you can write browser-based applications. You can find it online at ol3js.org, and it's still in development, but will be a beta soon. GeoGit. There's been a reference or two about GitHub, and GeoGit is taking the idea of distributed version control and applying it to spatial data. This allows multi-organization collaboration, multi-user collaboration, disconnected editing. That means I go out in the field, I pull down the data set, I make some changes, I get back to the office, I make a pull request for my changes. Someone reviews it, they can integrate it back into the data set. These topics can all be read about in detail, how you would do these workflows in Git. And the idea with GeoGit is to allow the same type of workflows that software developers have found to be so useful with their source code, and take that and do it with spatial data. You can find more online at geogit.org. And QGIS has come on Boundless's roadmap. We realize that open source is we realized that desktop GIS is not going away anytime soon. And this is critical for analysts. It's really important if someone emails you that shapefile and you want to look at it. It might be hard to pull that open in your browser. So we continue to keep enhancing QGIS's growth specifically with integration with the OpenGIS suite. We want to help users collaborate by integrating with GeoGit. We'd like to enhance documentation and tutorials, provide technical support and training. You can find more at qgis.org. I'll try to close up real quickly here, but sorry there. So learning to fish, I think, is really, there's that whole adage of give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach him to fish, he fishes, eats for life. And I think this is really important. I found a great article from a man named Tyler Cohen, a professor of economics at George Mason University, an essay in the New York Times entitled, "Who Will Prosper in the New World?" Amongst other things, he pointed out that free doesn't really help you if you don't make an effort. Regardless of the quality of freely available online education, it will only matter to those who are able and ready to take advantage of it. I found Liren's anecdote about the subway familiar. During my geology field camp at CSU, we were up in the San Juan Mountains in the wilderness doing mapping by hand. I had a little topo map. This was a long time ago. Little topo map, some colored markers, a compass, and we spent the day in the field. Towards the end of the day, a guy came up to me. He was from Rutgers or some place that had enough money to have handheld GPSs. He was lost. He was in a shadow. He was a mile from where he needed to be. And he said, "Can you help me?" And I was, "Where am I?" I was like, "You're right here." How did you know that? I was looking at my map, because that's what we had been taught, is how to read the map, not how to read the GPS. So I pointed him over the hill, and I hope he got home. I never heard anything about otherwise, but. So, Boundless Presence, who are we? We provide commercial support for our open source geospatial tools. Our products are MapMeter and the OpenGeo suite. Who am I? Well, I'm a guy who can sometimes bumble through a presentation and hopefully offer you something of use. Finally, I'd like to thank Gretchen Peterson, a well-known cartographer from Fort Collins as well, who created this really inspiring poster. It's actually an Antarctica with an elephant drawn on top of it. So don't waste time, start catching fish. Thanks.